We're born on Earth, why not die on Mars? Seems like maybe it'd be quite exciting. But so I think given the choice of dying on Earth or dying on Mars, I'd say, yeah, sure, I'll die on Mars.
Father, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Give us each our daily bread, and forgive us our sins. For we ourselves forgive everyone who is indebted to us. And lead us not into temptation.
Drive your car to Mars. Do yourself make space. Hiding behind Tesla's name. Afraid the sheep will wake. Will you save us from our sins? Will you help us to begin to build a place we can call home? The Mars colony of our own. Playing a game with all the souls who don't know deception is your name. Oh, belong.
And you can tell it's real because it looks so fake.
Okay, IPS evening deprogram for 9/12/2024. Typical news day. I think a tail cone from a C-17 Boeing fell from the sky, Donnie Darko style, landed next to a Catholic school in South Carolina. Very on brand. And by the way, they didn't only send the Starliner capsule back down to Earth, they sent the suits as well. I don't know what the meaning of it is, but we're still watching that slow motion disaster unfold, but that's the latest from Boeing, which is something that we've been talking about since before it started happening, because we were looking at the meaning of leave the world behind and the symbolism of the planes falling from the sky. By the way, gremlins just attacked my backup laptop computer, and the audio encoder may not be available for tonight. So if you're accustomed to listening on the audio streams, right now you're hearing a replay, but I'll fix it right after. I'm also going to open up phones. We didn't get too many calls yesterday regarding 9/11, which is the main topic, but I think we covered all the important points about how we have people who believe that people died because they still submit their mind to the authority of the screen, even though they know it lies at least 10% of the time, if not more. Or even if it's telling the truth, it says so from a frame of reference that is built upon lies. So we discussed how people who believe people died at this or that event can merely say they believe it, like a contemporary myth, like Bigfoot. But they can't claim to know. And it's an important distinction. It keeps people honest. And believers hate it when you ask them for facts over, well, feelings. Evidence over ideology. And that's a huge problem today. There are so many people who, just because they fall on the right side of the box, automatically believe certain pundits on that side. And they're made fools of all the time. Like the current thing of the day, it was it was Haitian cannibals, now it's Haitian cat eaters. And it turns out that the one photo we have of evidence that has a man walking with a goose is not in Springfield, Ohio. It's a goose, but it's not a Haitian. So they got like 1/3 of it right. But that was enough. They never let facts get in the way of a good narrative. All right, let's see who has rolled up here in chat. Didn't take very long to assemble 3+ dozen. Jungle Jim, Watchdog, Quays, thank you, by the way. I got your support there. Welcome to the raft. And why do we call this a raft? The mascot, the penguin, has some special significance, which we've talked about quite a lot. And the cyborg penguin is a recent adaptation, symbolizing the singularity, that they've taken control of their own evolutionary destiny. But the symbol of the raft is because when you have a group of penguins out on the water, they form into a group, like a flock on top of the water, but it's called a raft. And I described the mass media or mass mediated world as essentially under a sea of disinformation, the sea of irrelevance Huxley talked about. And I like to think of the raft as atop the sea of irrelevance into which everyone else is submerged. And the most submerged ones are the ones who, in addition to being deep within this sea of irrelevance, these direct attempts to sabotage people's cognition, they're also drinking too much of the various Kool-Aids, the QAnon Kool-Aid, the various truther cults. And so we're trying to push back against the reflexive red pillism. Red pills are all contaminated, and the people who are pushing these things the most are getting paid ridiculous amounts of money to conform you to a worldview, just like the mainstream does. Tim Pool is a psyop. I've already known. I thought there was something fishy about somebody who never takes off his beanie cap even when he's wearing a suit at a formal event. But yeah, Tim Pool is a psyop, and so is everybody else attached to him. That's why he had Donnie Darkened as a guest. It's like, yeah, this guy preaches the gospel with this creepy red-eyed Trump Antichrist avatar, and he writes all of his sermons with ChatGPT and has way too many million followers. Anyway, he was unmasked as a pro-Trumper who is known to people like Candace Owens, is friends with Donald Trump Jr. And I listened to this guy confess. So he's been called to the table, he's been called to basically answer to this like group of people who are doxing him, and he came clean. To his credit, Donnie Darkened, real name Mark something, came clean. And he explained that essentially he did so well with his pro-Trump stuff that it became his life. And he's paying for his entire lifestyle and his family with it. And this Donnie Darkened thing came later. And he's always been conflicted between the one that gives him money praising Trump or the one that doesn't pay as much, the Donnie Darkened, where he's saying run from Trump. It's a really shady character. The whole thing is just shady. But I'm just saying that's the type of person that gets mainstream coverage. They get put on big platforms, and it's because these are operatives. And they have some kind of connections which give them these armies, these bot armies to hype everything they say. There's no other reason why some guy whose sole purpose on Twitter is to claim that John F. Kennedy is alive and well wearing a Trump suit, that guy. How does he have 20,000 subs? Just gaining hundreds of subs a day to hear this stuff. And if you look at the responses, they look like they're prefabricated. ChatGPT, totally fake, not real people. And I'm always happy to see all these various phonies exposed. But it's not just this Donnie Darkened guy. I mean, he found a grift in the griftosphere. You can't really blame him. And now he's got to take care of a family. So I kind of I'm not even being critical of him at this point. But I am being critical of all his followers who mindlessly lapped it up. His ridiculous gematria. And I called him out multiple times. I was like, you tell everybody this is true, but you don't know about hoaxes and psyops and crisis actors? Like, you're obviously being played, and you're in no position to tell people anything about how to see the world and how to think about things if you're also similarly confused. If you're immersed in the sea of irrelevance, and most people are. if you're, and the thing is, you are or you aren't, you're programmed or you're deprogrammed, and deprogramming is an act of volition at the level of the individual. There is no group of people who've woken up, least of all Trutherville, or even less than Trutherville, Woketown. These people are in a deep, deep slumber compared to the normies that they accuse of being sleepers. But we have the right story, we have the right understanding of this story that's being presented, what I call the metascript. And briefly, and you could just watch Newsbenders, the play, 30-minute play Newsbenders, it'll tell you the whole story. But it essentially explains how the news is being written in advance. And I take it one step further to say that not only are they prefabricating historic events that transform our collective worldview, but they augment their fake news, their propaganda, with the entertainment. And they've synchronized these things. So much so that we are consistently calling this stuff out. Somebody in the chat said, hey, you got to watch Rebel Ridge. It's got to have some kind of predictive programming value. The first 5 minutes happened to one of the Dolphins football players, Tyreek Hill, the day after. And there were people talking about the two. Like, oh, you got to watch this Netflix. It just came out. That's why I mentioned Leave the World Behind. It was on Netflix, and it brought up planes falling from the sky. And ever since, we've had things like this. The South Carolina, more problems for embattled aerospace giant. And I have a couple insights on something that just kind of occurred to me here. I was listening to this article from The Independent, and this is about the Boeing and why it's being targeted for demolition. And this is even something that I saw in Fly Me to the Moon, where they make mention of an explosion, and then they show, or they mention Boeing. So Boeing has been the subject of many disasters over the last year, ever since that movie came out, and it's been culminating with this thing in space, the Boeing Starliner. And all of this stuff fits the predictive programming, the idea of entertainment synchronized with future news events. That's the key. Entertainment is synchronized with the news. And oftentimes, they repeat the messages in various formats, various forms of media, many times. So it's been drilled into your head. It's like advertising. They're propagandizing you, but they're using all of the most sophisticated marketing tactics available. It's very subtle. In fact, I was looking through my notes on that movie Fly Me to the Moon, and it's all about marketing and selling people on the need to go to the moon. But they make these points, like one of the ad person says, we need to make the moon landing a part of their life every single day in some way, without them being aware of it. Brainwashing. And I remember this, and I used to play it a lot. I'll just play it right now. Eric Holder. Eric Holder made this statement before we had this 2-decade mass shooting spree in all the schools, where he said, we have to brainwash people about guns. And so what I'm thinking here is, well, what evidence do we have of brainwashing since this was said? And I would say not only the mass shootings, but also the proliferation of first-person shooters. All these first-person shooters put the mass shooter into the realm of possibility, makes it believable. That's predictive programming. And you're just playing these games, immersed in it, and you just take it for granted. And it makes me wonder if this is why we used to have all these slasher films and then serial killers. No more serial killers. Now it's mass shooters. It's like they updated the paradigm. This is just the next generation of psyops is going to be mass shooters, because our media is now segmented or fragmented. It's not as centralized. There's too many platforms, and there's so much competition for people's attention that you couldn't really stretch out a Ted Bundy in 2024. You could certainly do a mass shooting a day, and nobody gets tired of it for some reason. But let me play this clip, Eric Holder, about how they need to, quote, brainwash people.
I've also asked the school board to make a part of every day some kind of anti-violence, anti-gun message. Every day, every school, at every level. One thing that I think is clear with young people and with adults as well is that we just have to be repetitive about this. It's not enough to simply have a catchy ad on a Monday and then only do it every Monday. We need to do this every day of the week and just really brainwash people into thinking about guns in a vastly different way.
Just brainwash people into thinking about guns in a vastly different way. And I would suggest that this is the basis for, because someone asked me today in a chat, they said in one of my video comments, we talked about how they did the hoax with 9/11, but what's the why? Well, the why of mass shootings is to brainwash people to be afraid of guns, to use hyper-realistic training drills and simulation to create the hyperstition of the mass shooter, and to change public opinion. Obviously, we've seen the agenda as it rolls out. They've introduced the mentally ill mass shooter that is susceptible to mind viruses, and that person will be the justification for censoring the internet. They'll say it's too dangerous for crazy people with mental illnesses to get online because they do stuff. And that's why every single one of these, they're not patsies, but the shooters have the same exact makeup. But when it comes to something like a 9/11, I say the reason for it is for the global synchronization of worldviews. Everybody in the world became part of the same worldview when the atom bomb was introduced, when the moon landing happened. The 9/11 was a similar event. They're making history. And so what they have prepared is a historic event. They have all the actors, they have all the scripts. The whole thing is planned far in advance. It's just like any other mass casualty simulation. Not a coincidence that on 9/11, there were something like 88 concurrent drills being performed. And the script of these drills had to do with terror attacks. We're talking 1,000 plus plainclothes simulation actors, mass casualty actors, crisis actors, whatever you want to call them. And all they do is they run a simulation, present it to the masses as though it's real, and just like that, it goes into the history books. But they know some people will see through it, and that's why they have Trutherville. They allow people to self-segment, to just basically sort themselves into whatever box they want to go into, and the people who reject the mainstream have the alternate truth. And that's what we're trying to break away from, because those people are still under the impression that it was a terror attack, whether it was by our government, somebody else's government, and they cannot imagine how these buildings could have been taken down without direct energy weapons or tactical nukes. And what they're missing here is that we're talking about movie magic. And this is supported by predictive programming and concurrent programming and the consistency with it. This is the standard operating procedure. What a lot of people miss is that PSYOPs aren't like something that's done just every once in a while. No, this is a consistent thing. And some PSYOPs involve rumors about immigrants eating cats. Other PSYOPs involve terror attacks and mass shootings. But there are various forms of psychological operations. And there are real events, obviously. However, the fake events, the ones that we challenge, are the ones that are generally extraordinary. So no one says everything is fake. That is a gross mischaracterization. And anybody who says that just hasn't done their homework. And I'm not obliged to correct people, but I want to just make the point that most people say everything is real. That is the same error as saying everything's fake. What we're saying is that extraordinary events require a bit more scrutiny and evidence, preferably, before we concede that it, quote, happened. We have to reject the argument, the appeal to the authority of the monolith. And if you trust it, what's your basis for trusting it? Because it's not like there are competing factions and different governments running PSYOPs that aren't connected to the whole. It's monolithic in scope. That's the thing that people miss. Truthers know about PSYOPs, but they don't know about the Psy-War. They can't see it. And that's because they're in the box. You have to have what I call the off-world stage perspective. And I thought this would be the best time to set this up, to really blow up what I call the parallel media, because all of Trutherville is hunched around Trump, and Alex Jones is just telling them he's going to be shot. They're going to nuke us. World War III. Trump's going to get shot. It's just like a cycle. They just repeat these things, and this is from 8 years ago. Same story. I remember in 2016, Alex Jones crying because he said, Donald Trump is the reincarnation of George Washington, and I'm afraid that the New World Order is going to kill him. So none of this is new. And if you're still entrained by that, if you're still enthralled by that, you wouldn't be here. Appreciate the support. I think somebody picked up the other Penguinotti painting, and I have another one, this one on canvas, in the works. So just a heads up, I'm going to pay for the first batch of the IPS Insider through art sales. It's my backup plan, and it's actually seeming like it's going to work, that by the 15th or so, about 3 days, I may be able to pull this off. Tominoid says, the Japanese New Year flaming Star Wars plane ritual kicked it off. I'll have to look at that. Joined by Pocahontas, FTW. Breadcrumb says, Tim, I heard you don't like breadcrumbs. Did you see my previous comment on that? Oh, using questions. You said it's kind of a... Yeah, what I said was this. That the idea of breadcrumbing is kind of disingenuous. Like, I have this big truth, but I don't think that you're capable of it. So I'm just going to drop little hints like I'm in charge of waking you up, like dropping pills. And I don't like that approach for a lot of reasons. A lot of the reasons are just asking questions, for example. People just asking questions or asking loaded questions are really just making claims, but in a very indirect way. And I don't like all this indirection and manipulation. We get enough of it from the mainstream. I don't need truthers trying to manipulate me into accepting a premise. But breadcrumbing is just kind of a tactic, and I'm just not in favor of red pills, is what I mean. Like pills, even. That's what you mean. When you say breadcrumbs, we mean red pills. Like Nick Fuentes said, I red-pilled Candace Owens. Meaning that you gave them these bits of information and then they woke up. Alex Jones woke me up. No, he actually turned your dream, the blissful dream, into a nightmare. That's what really happened. And the whole pill analogy is just tired, but blue pill, normies, red pill, truthers, black pill are truthers who've given up hope. White pill, certain things that are fake. Like it's a white pill that mass shooters, terror attacks, suicide bombers, that a lot of these things are faker than not. That's actually good news. It's good news when somebody says to you, hey, nobody died or cried. Nobody suffered. There was no real casualties at this event. That's actually good news. Not to everybody. You think Ben Shapiro wants it to be true that there weren't 40 decapitated babies? He was grandstanding on top of a pile of dead infants, trying to make points, shaming his colleagues for not taking a stance with him. And I'm just like, this is just shameless. These people are invested in death. They're invested in these various narratives. Death clingers, corpse clutchers. And look, there's no corpses floating around the raft. Like if you look at the raft, what's nice about it, look up, no chemtrails above us. Look around, no corpses. There's no theatrical blood reddening the waters. Like, no, we don't bring any of that stuff with us. We're not propaganda mules. Breadcrumb said, I heard my first encounter with Dave J. Oh, I'm sorry. Dave J. is not an auto hoaxer. We'll leave it at that. He's in Trutherville. It's kind of funny because he thinks that he has some sort of claim to being an authority on it because he states the obvious. Dave J. is Captain Obvious. He's like, that's fake, nobody died. Like, yeah, fine, but that's low information non-belief. Like, I don't believe it because I'm incredulous. That doesn't get a pass. You have to be able to say why you know it's fake. So I'll say, I don't know. The story just broke. I need more information. Even though I know the general pattern is it's fake, but I don't just reflexively say fake. We don't just say everything's fake. I say if it's an extraordinary claim and if it's attended by certain hallmarks that would indicate it being a hoax. So we here at Infinite Plane Radio promote what I call informed disbelief. And informed disbelief is a lot heavier than low information belief and low information disbelief. Low information is what typifies the realm of believers. Left, right, Woketown, Trutherville. It's almost reflexive. And here's why. It's not their fault. It's this 72 hours of news packed into every 24-hour news cycle with all the entertainment and all the drama and all the social media magnifying this. There's just not enough time to go deep. So people make these really shallow takes out of necessity in their rush to believe, in their rush to have an opinion and take a stance. And that's what that's the foundational mistake that they all make. They rush to judge. And skepticism is primarily about suspending judgment. Nobody can look at the screen and see a headline, it's like 50 or 33 dead, and can tell me with any authority that they know it's true. I'm like, you don't have enough information, and I don't either. But I am very informed about how media works, and I would list the reasons why I would assert it to be fake. And all they have are feelings. So what really matters here? Reason. We're trying to break away from the realm of subjectivity. Breadcrumb says, is this live or a coincidence? Eccentric View says, you're my favorite truther at the moment, Tim. Better than JLB and me and fakeologists are the cutting fringe. And our think tanks. Because we're not just these isolated voices. There's a lot of people that kind of form around a lot of our discoveries, our perspectives. And I'm in near total agreement on almost everything with these individuals in terms of media deconstruction, and we have the same level of irreverence. We're not triggered. We're not shedding tears. We're not tiptoeing. We're not walking on eggshells when a tragedy happens. I mean, I just made this meme of a pair of pants upside down. I was trying to make it upside down. I think I had one. It just didn't look good. But a giant pair of pants burning against a city skyline. Like, I think it's funny. But I wanted the pants upside down so it would look like Twin Towers. You see, I wouldn't make flippant jokes if I believed that 3,000 people were murdered. I just know that more than 3,000 people got big checks from Big Brother for participating in a big PSYOP. And the purpose of the PSYOP wasn't Israel gaining some strategic advantage. The purpose of the PSYOP wasn't George Bush and Dick Cheney making money off the military-industrial complex. These are all just stinky red herrings. These things are just throw them away. You can discard it. It's not a whodunit. It's a what is it? And it's a PSYOP. It's a myth. And events on this scale are used periodically to get everybody on the same sheet, to get everybody to stare at the monolith at the same time and come to believe that the latest magic trick was real. And I think their entire operation is kind of shoddy at times. In retrospect, certainly. But at the time, when 9/11 happened, that was cutting edge. That was cutting edge mind control. Truthers could only speculate and would mostly be led down rabbit trails like, oh, it was direct energy weapons, it was a tactical nuke, it was reptilians, it was a mass satanic ritual sacrifice, and all those things make more sense. So this is what I will say, to give Trutherville credit. Even their wildest theories are more plausible than the mainstream version. And they rest on that, and I understand it. However, their base assumption is that the screen isn't telling a lie. They just think the people on the screen lie. And that's what they miss. The people on the screen are all liars. Like, we know this, that's obvious. But, and even if they don't know they're lying, it's their perspective turns them into liars. But it's the screen itself, how it frames things. Like, so when you look at a magic show, you can be fooled by the trick if you're sitting in the seat, because it's been framed that from that perspective, you're going to be fooled by optical illusions. If you walked out of your seat and you looked at it from backstage, you would see that he didn't really cut that woman in half, or that he didn't really pull a rabbit out of a hat. You would have more information. Well, with something like 9/11, all you see is what they show you on TV. You don't see backstage. You don't see the special effects groups. You don't see the cutting room floor where they created a lot of these scenes in advance. Nor are you privy to the decades of metascripters behind the scenes inserting messaging to prepare the collective psyche for a collective trauma to enjoy decades later. And again, it's about synchronizing people. It's about establishing a new world view. And it works. Remember George H.W. Bush saying that they're going to establish a new world order? And it was like September 11th, 1990, like 11 years before. The Pentagon's construction begins September 11th, 1941. And you just go down the line. The whole thing is just script, it's encoded, and it's tied in with decades of propaganda disguised as entertainment. Okay, let's see here. Breadcrumbs. Yeah, we all have our approaches. I'm just saying my approach, just so you know, if breadcrumbing, if planting seeds, if the Socratic method is what you choose to do, go for it. I say leave Normieville alone. I do not try to wake up normals. I just like, I look at them as mind war casualties. And at least they're not going to be beset with psychosomatics. Normal people, normies, I mean, this is just the categories that people self-sort into. The person who accepts the mainstream mediated worldview is living in a state of bliss. And they're not afraid of 5G towers or cirrus clouds. Like, why mess that up for them? Like, they're happy. Why inject all kinds of paranoia? And truthers think, well, because I'm waking them up. No, what you're doing is, as a good propaganda mule for Big Brother, you're bringing them toxic red pills, hooking them on hopium, and flooding them with stress hormones, and terrifying them with neo-eschatologies about demonic aliens and mass mind control. You can't drink the water, you can't breathe the air. Like, you drag them into a nightmare. You're not doing people favors. So I leave normies alone because truthers are always targeting them, and I think that dynamic needs to stop. Like, what I'm thinking here is we need to break away from the idea that you should be dispensing pills, because you can only deprogram yourself. You can't change how somebody else processes. You can't change their epistemology overnight. You have to recognize here, too, that everybody goes through the same programming. It's just a process of being saturated in it your entire life. And you have two classes. You have the programmed class, which is everybody, and then you have the minute. I don't know the numbers, but there's a very small group of people who are in the know at a very high level about how deep the fakery goes, the programmers. So the programmers and the programmed. The few manipulate the many. And what we are doing here, what we are spearheading, is we are breaking away from the alt programming, which is where thinkers go. You thought your way out of the box, but you found yourself in another box until you pulled yourself out of that. And that's kind of the objective here. Let's create this parallel media that is not framed by their screen, which they all take for granted as telling the truth. Thank you for feeding the Crackgwin watchdog. IPS appreciates the support. Now, the Crackgwin is a reference to, and I think I even posted one on Minds. I was trying to work on a Godzilla Penguin mashup. But when there are enough of us on this raft, then we can effectively create what I call the Crackgwin. So here it is. Kraken. I'm talking about the Kraken. Observing Reality says, perhaps you don't have to know you're in a death cult to be in one. Agreed. Jungle Jim says, best to stay away from pills. Precisely. And don't drink the Kool-Aid. Breadcrumb says, been around since 2015. We've talked before. Yeah, probably. But I have my approach these days here is this. The normies are unsalvageable. Woketown, same. Trutherville is the only place where we're going to find people who are even capable of stepping over that line. You see, there's a like a screen, you're on one side of it or the other. Which side of it are you on? And this is a parallel, I call it parallel because it's a breakaway movement, but we're not trying to be antagonistic. Like, I'm not competing for alt media, the grifter sphere. I'm not competing for subs. Like, the types of people who subscribe to somebody like a Stu Peters, yeah, we don't need that. We're actually aiming for those who've already figured this out. And I have an estimation. I believe there's easily 10,000, but it could be much, much more. I'm kind of even thinking that's a conservative estimate. I'm catching up on chat. I know I'm falling far behind. Breadcrumb says Tim Osman was hanging in the Dave J Discord server. I obviously left and blocked him. Tim Osman is a Globe Earth advocate, a glurf. Nothing wrong with his perspectives other than he's just a true believer. So I don't even try to argue or debate with him, and I could care less about somebody's opinion about cosmology if they haven't figured out that news is fake. And that's why I don't, like, I was going to get into a debate with Fight the Flat Earth. He sent me a message on Twitter, wanted to do a debate, and I'm like, this is not about the shape of the Earth. This isn't something that you win in a debate if you're solely talking about the shape of the Earth and you don't include the media itself, the thing that tells us what the world is or what they show us from space. That's all stuff that I think needs to be examined. And they just want to focus on what we can observe from on the ground. They say that they don't, like, I was deep in this debate with McToon, and he said, that's not my claim, that's NASA's claim. Well, no, you're defending NASA's claims. But they don't allow you to talk about special effects. They don't even include that in their analysis. And if you're not including special effects or movie magic, then you're not having an honest debate, and they're not willing to have that honest debate. It's pretty clear. So I don't tend to waste time with those individuals. Like, this is an example. Look at the hair. These are the civilians who just went up into space. The first civilian spacewalk, they beat Tom Cruise. And I was just talking about Tom Cruise's hair. Like, how are they going to fake it in space? And if you look here on the screen, they do this ridiculous thing. And a lot of people still find this believable.
Rachel and Kinsley, we're so excited to bring you along our Dragon capsule. So we've been up here for just over 28 hours, flying around and around the globe. We're going about 8 kilometers per...
Now, one of the things that I noted here, you had this image of somebody doing a spacewalk, but there's something that you often see, and people miss this. This is part of their magic trick, part of their magic show. So here's an example. You're looking at an astronaut, or rather one of these civilians, who's stepping out of the capsule, and he's looking down at the ball Earth. But you're looking at him looking at the Earth. And this is a common thing. Like, so for example, on the ISS, you often see people on the ISS photographing the Earth from within the ISS. But you don't see what they see. You don't see the perspective that the astronaut actually has. You're seeing them witnessing the Earth. You're like, it's secondhand. You're a secondhand witness. I'm looking at this person, and he's looking down at the Earth. How do I know that he's not looking at a big screen? That this isn't some surround LED screen situation? I don't know that. But this is consistent. This is a typical way of misleading people. And I found something else today that was kind of typical of how people misread these things. They just have to basically fit it within their box. So we often see bubbles surrounding the capsules, bubbles around the ISS, and that's because they fake space underwater. Not all the time. Not inside the ISS. You know, there's different scenes, and one of the things that gives away the fact that it's still done underwater is the light diffusion, and the other thing are the bubbles. But when people who don't know about the special effects see the bubbles, they're at a loss to explain it. So here it says, conspiracy theorists claim that the moving orbs behind SpaceX's Dragon are UFOs. This is from the Star. At certain points, Bright objects can be seen hurtling past the spacecraft. YouTube conspiracy channel Disclose Screen has claimed that there were literally hundreds of orbs, UFO orbs, seen around SpaceX's departure. Posting an alien emoji, another believer said, "Wow, that's amazing. How many of them? Hundreds of UFO orbs around SpaceX. Seems nice." Multiple UFOs seen swarming around SpaceX. And then NASA cuts the feed, and everybody gets suspicious. Well, these days they'll say it's propellant, and that explanation doesn't make sense, but it's just their best type of deflection, I guess. It's propellant. No, those are bubbles, and this is a commonly observed phenomenon. The Starman going around the Earth that had tons of bubbles just going straight up, and people are like, "Oh, it's space dust." Since when do we have space dust? Breadcrumb said, "I would love to talk about the question stuff, how to approach, make the raft bigger." Yeah, I don't believe in the Socratic method. I have a different approach. We can approach this differently, but I'm not attempting, like, I'm not a proselytizing person. I don't want to wake people up. I'm only communicating to those who've already figured out stuff. Because I don't need to spend a lot of time explaining to people why they shouldn't be afraid of clouds or 5G towers, and why it's safe to drink the water, and why they shouldn't be a reflexive anti-whatever the pro side is saying. Like, I take the anti-anti position, and too many truthers, even if you're trying to wake them up a little bit, you have to, they might be attached to identity politics. They might be Trump worshippers, and that's just a lot of damage to undo. These are mind war casualties. So I'm not really interested in trying to convince people to think like me. Like, this is not a cult in that sense. I didn't invent skepticism. We happen to be applying some, it's not even new, it's just applied skepticism, but it's not the skepticism that you generally see, which is very partisan, or they're only skeptical of the other side. And it's not even being skeptical of reality itself as though everything's a simulation. I totally reject simulation theory, another psyop to watch out for. Simulation theory is a planted narrative thrown in to keep truthers from calling the world view accurately a simulation. It's accurate to say 9/11 was a simulation. It's accurate to say fill-in-the-blank school shooting was a simulation, just as it's accurate to say that every hyper-realistic school shooting drill is a simulation. So my point here is that, taken together, the aggregate of all the simulated news events, the word fake doesn't do it justice. Simulated. January 6th, simulated riots. You take all the simulated events, and what do you have? You have a worldview augmented by simulations. That's the simulation, if you live in it. If you confuse the map, the model, with the terrain itself, which is what people do. And if you make that mistake, and then you start noticing eerie coincidences in the media, it might lead you down the path of everything's fake, everything's a simulation. That's where Joe Rogan leads you. Joe Rogan's like taken aback by all these strange events, Trump getting shot in the head, and then the next day something else happens, and he's just so blown away, he says, we must be in a simulation. Or reality's a simulation. It's like, well, no, reality is not a simulation. The world is real. You can pretty much count on that. There's a reason why they want you to think it's not, though. But the worldview is fake. They want you to conflate the two. By the way, phones are open if you want to call in. We're talking about orbs in space, but they're really just bubbles. Okay, this is a post from Messianic Charlatan. Comments in this thread are great. I think I kind of perused this one yesterday. This is there anything but the World Trade Center? The horror of the trapped victims was photoshopping and not high quality. Okay, so this is an individual posting images of the towers and some images suggesting that you saw Photoshop overlays. And I've gone through this. I've looked at all this, and what we're looking at are cinematic techniques. This is just special effects. I can't emphasize enough that if you're not including in your worldview, when you're looking at news media, the existence of special effects, you're not appraising it with the right perspective. You will never have enough information to get to the truth. The best you can do is the alt truth. And we have been analyzing these things long enough to recognize that the predictive programming entrainment is always happening. This most recent one we just talked about, Rebel Ridge, I'm still waiting to see where that leads to. There's a picture here of the falling man. Richard Drew photographed this. And we've talked about this before. The same guy who photographed the 9/11 falling man. And by the way, the leg position of the falling man is the same leg position that the 33-year-old who jumped into the bottomless pit, the reflecting pool at ground zero, that guy, he had the same leg position before he jumped in, and he broke his leg, supposedly. So I think there's some kind of a symbolic meaning to it. But the photographer who photographed the falling man is the same one who photographed RFK as he fell to his death. So that's a Kennedy assassination connection to 9/11. Now, similarly, the photographer who photographed the bullet whizzing by Trump's head also photographed George W. Bush on 9/11 as news of the first plane hitting the tower was being whispered into his ear. So you have a 9/11 connection and an assassination link. Same photographer, both of these events. And this is a common facet of these psyops. These propaganda photos are works of art. And apparently Richard Drew was awarded some pretty significant gigs. I'm scrolling through this individual's feed. I'm not going to go through all this now, but there's plenty of stuff that you could go through on your own if you're still stuck on believing this thing to be real. We kind of purged a lot of the death clingers. I used to have people debate me. They would insist that there were some people dead, but they would rule out others, like no planes, but there had to have been somebody in Building 7, at least one person. They can't let it go. It's like, let it go. Nobody's telling you to be encumbered by some fake death. Richard M. Nixon, U.S. President, said the American people don't believe anything until they see it on television. Exactly. That is not even hyperbole. It's not an exaggeration. It's not even an ironic. It's just a factual statement. It's just true. It's how it works. All right, I have a few comments I want to get through as well. Deleted user said Martin Luther King became Don King. Heard that one. Linda Curtis said, this is from the other day, no offense to the first caller, but in my opinion, the Bible is written as a playbook. That's why they can sync it every decade to believers to say the end of the world is coming. Interesting. I would agree with that. And the metascript, the storylines that we see here, are often inspired by or based upon Old Testament, New Testament, and it's not even like they tell you, it's just there. A great example of this is Wall-E, the 2008 film. It's a retelling of Noah's flood, although it's climate change. And it tells it through iconography, through symbolism. Just like Noah and the dove bringing him a olive branch, here you have a robot sent down to Earth from the space ark to see if it's safe to live on the Earth again because it's been flooded by trash. And the little robot they send down to Earth, here's a picture of it, and this is a Pixar, by the way, all kinds of 113 symbolism in this movie. They love that number at Pixar. So it's not a dove, but it's like a robot bird, looks kind of like a dove. So it goes down to Earth and it finds a branch, shows that life is possible on Earth, and it takes it back up to the ark in space. So the humans can go back down and repopulate after the flood. So it's the Noah's flood myth, but this is for climate change. And this all ties into the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. Same story. But they don't tell you, oh, by the way, if you watch Pixar's movie, you're actually watching an Old Testament myth. And there are other layers to the story. Most of it is humans are bad, robots are good. And then there's a bit of a class warfare, agrarian revolution, kind of a communist theme, where the robots represent the poor, the lower class, and the people who are having been in the ships for generations. They're kind of they're corpulent, their muscles have atrophied, their bones are weak, and so they're disconnected from the world. They're living in a world of just complete comfort, and they have a screen in front of them at all times. So the robots are essentially slaves. That's kind of the message you get. And when they go back down to the Earth, they decide that they're going to get rid of technology and they're just going to work the soil. So they go from being this space-faring species now to just going back to a pre-industrial revolution. Because, of course, man's greed will clog up the skies with space junk and the whole world will be covered in trash. But the robots are definitely oppressed. Like, you feel sorry for Wall-E. He's got to pick up all that trash. It's like a punishment. Okay, next comment. Etheric Bliss said, please look it up. I wanted to see the squids in space. I've been hunting for it. I'm trying to find the clip of the person watching the ISS who saw what he said was a dragon in space. The trouble with finding, I've been hunting for this, but I can't because every time I search dragon, I get SpaceX dragon. But I'll keep looking. And I looked at this thing, and it did look like this person saw something in space. But knowing what we know, I was like immediately ruled that out. And then I thought too, why would a dragon, if they existed, even if it was in space, why would it be flapping its wings? Because whatever was in the tank there seemed to be flapping its wings. But on closer inspection, I walked away convinced that we were looking at a squid, an octopus, that's all. And it was kind of at the edge of the light, but it gave the impression of flapping wings. And this is just months after SpaceX and NASA announced sending squids to the ISS. Breadcrumb says, do you paint from AI or photo references? I do all three. I have a signature series of paintings that are based on what I call my unicursal drawings, but I started doing AI recently because it's pretty consistently good, to be honest. I'm not a Luddite about this stuff. I'm just deeply appreciative of the fact that we have all this stuff at our disposal. It's kind of a leveler of the playing field. Matt Armitage says, is space a liquid? I don't know what space is as far as its composition beyond a certain point. I'm still not convinced that the Earth is curved. And if I can't find anything to convince me it's curved, there's nothing to substantiate it, then I can't even start with the assumption that the Earth itself is a discrete object. For all we know, we might just be at the bottom of the universe, and it goes on forever. I mean, for all I know. And everybody believes, of course, that we're on a finite, a ball, and that we're floating in this vast abyss, and they have this big picture that's been sold to them, but I really doubt the big picture. So when I say space, space is up from my perspective. But if you are a ball believer, space is all around, all encompassing, goes in all directions. But the universe, the consensus is that it's flat and expanding, infinite, kind of like an infinite plane in a way. But I'm still looking at this thing as what they show us from space is what they want us to think is there. And I kind of think that you can't trust anything that is said to be coming from space. That includes satellite imagery. So they say, like on 9/11, since we're still talking about 9/11, there was a astronaut on board with a handheld camera recording 9/11 from space. And I read this guy's backstory, and it was just ridiculous. How many lies this person has to tell. I mean, there's so many liars, but that's just what media does. It gives you a spin on reality. So he's up there recording 9/11 from space, and it looks like he's recording miniatures. It doesn't look like he's hundreds of miles above the Earth. And then he talks about you can see the smoke from up there. And then he pulls out a trumpet and he starts playing taps. And then he talks about how while 9/11 happened, the astronauts just happened to be gathered around listening to the audiobook of Tom Clancy's Sum of All Fears. Sum of All Fears, 9/11 predictive programming. They're reading this book as 9/11 happens and they talk about it. That's concurrent programming. That's not an eerie coincidence. But they no longer use handheld cameras like that. Like, we don't get iPhone footage. Like, show me iPhone footage of the Earth from space. They kind of had to walk all that back because if they, let's say they had an iPhone in space for real, you think they'd throw it around, have it record, and it'd be flipping around, and you'd see, as the astronauts see, just floating around there. But you don't really see that because what we see is always carefully contrived. A little bit of acrobatics involved, mostly hanging. And a lot of them don't even look that good at it, these astronauts. A lot of them look like they're red, and like some of them look like they're struggling. Their clothes are too tight. In fact, let me bring this up because we're talking about the astronauts and how they fake like they're floating in space. And I just saw this. So right now it's the MTV Music Video Awards. Here we go. NASA cannot compete with Kate Perry's special effects here. Like, she's floating around more realistically than the astronauts ever have. So this is Kate Perry performing Dark Horse at the Video Music Awards. And I'm just going to play it with no sound so we don't get a copyright. But the way she's levitating and running atop the heads of the other dancers, floating around, and there's this big CERN portal behind her. So tomorrow, we're going to hear tomorrow, Truth Reveal is going to be talking about Kate Perry's latest satanic invocations. There's always something to outrage conservatives about what's on TV. This is what they do all the time. And this is part of this big psi war in general. All the Satanism stuff, all the occult stuff that they flaunt. Remember when Sam Smith wore the devil horns on TV? Like, he bought this cheesy devil costume from Party City, and it just lit up the Christosphere, the online Christians. They were just like so triggered. And like, this is what they want. Since you don't believe in the pandemic, they want you to have the moral panic, and the moral panic separates you from the other side. Just like the people who are deep believers in the pandemic model separate from the side opposite from them. So there's a constant psi war going on. So it's not a coincidence that Kate Perry is doing a performance here that's going to be compared to a CERN portal ritual. But note how she's floating. She's floating around. You can't see the wires. Now, this scene here is so believable. Like, I can't say it looks fake to me. It looks like she's floating on top of these people. If I didn't know this was being performed live, I would assume it was just CGI. But again, NASA cannot do this. If NASA was real, their levitation would look as real as Kate Perry. But NASA special effects are just not that good compared to this whatsoever. And they're not aging well, by the way. Catching up on your comments. Dave Copperfield really flies, says Matt. Yeah, it's a magic show. The world stage is a magic show. And I think that's a really nice analogy here, because magic shows require your suspension of disbelief on some level, willingness to be faked out. But the thing is, when you go to a magic show, unless you're a child, you don't assume you're seeing real magic. Like, you're aware that I don't know how he pulled this off, but I know it was just a magic trick. Yet when people watch television, they have this childlike suspension of judgment where I can't see how this is fake, therefore it was real. There were people who were saying that Trump's AR-15 ear piercing was real. Like, what do you mean? you're pretty well apprised of how fake everything else is, the fakeability, the synchronization between the entertainment media and the news media for propaganda purposes and mind entrainment in mass, and you're suddenly gonna just drop your critical thinking? Did the government inject you with mind aids? How did that happen? Like, this is mind war inoculation. If you've been listening to Infinite Plane Radio and you operate under the premise that it's better to be skeptical than not in a world of liars competing for your attention, I mean, I'm just, at this point, we don't even have to be on the defensive. You could be secure in the fact that if you're skeptical about all media at this level, you do have the moral high ground. Nobody should say, how dare you not believe? How dare you not treat this as some kind of a tragic event and walk on eggshells around it? That's all emotional manipulation. Hey, look at this article. AI can change belief in conspiracy theories. So a study has found that they can fix people. This is re-education. But the irony of it here isn't that they're curing people of conspiracy theories. They're getting them to stop believing in alt media. It just turns them back into normies. And Normieville is conspiracy theories. But these are state-approved beliefs, so they don't have that negative designation. But it's really just conspiracy. Like, for example, in Normieville, man landed on the moon. Like, that is a psyop that we could consider to be actually a... I mean, it's to the point where both sides are equally culpable here. They're both essentially conspiracy theorists at this point. But AI can change belief in conspiracy theories. It says, whether it's a mistaken idea that the moon landings never happened, or the false claim that the jabs contained microchips, conspiracy theories abound with dangerous consequences. And this is the main agenda here. The introduction of the thought crime, the mind virus that they can isolate. You know how they always talk about they're isolating this particular strain? They need the public to be convinced that they have isolated the dangerous mind virus. And I think we're there. I think they use 2020 to make the case that the most dangerous people in the world are the asymptomatic mind virus super spreaders. If you haven't seen Hot Skull, and that's why the first issue of The Insider has the penguin with the burning head. The movie Hot Skull, it's a series actually, is about a lockdown because there are mind viruses spreading around. And everybody's mandated to wear earplugs. And if you see somebody and their ears aren't covered, you run. Don't listen to what they have to say because you might catch it. That's the whole plot. And it's just reality, basically. Shining a spotlight on the dangerous consequences of conspiracy theories. And there's hundreds of articles here. This is from ScienceDirect.com. They've just been building this case. It says researchers have found that such beliefs can be altered by chat with an AI bot. It says our findings fundamentally challenge the view that evidence and arguments are of little use once someone has gone down the rabbit hole. Crucially, researchers said, the approach relies on an AI system that can draw on a vast array of information to produce conversations that encourage critical thinking and provide bespoke, fact-based counter-arguments. The AI knew in advance what the person believed, and because of that, it tailored its persuasion to their precise belief system. Fascinating. So this is working. But they don't need AI for this. You know, I think what we have are instances here of where they're automating processes that were formerly done by misinformation agents, disinformation agents. How do you think conspiracy theorists are made? They're made by plants, by limited hangout operatives who are seeking out anybody paying attention so they can drag them down this particular rabbit hole and control them, observe them, put them in this petri dish, control what they know, contaminate it with other stuff, and then provide them an entire worldview that doesn't challenge the big picture. They've been nullified. We're still going through the notes. Main topic of today's stream, I wanted to talk about the significance of the C-17 dropping its tail cone on a Catholic school. Then this. So some individual going by Wicked Thoughts Inc. on Instagram is selling these hats. And it's New York. It's NY, but the N is made of the Twin Towers and the smoke connecting them, and the Y behind it. And you see two little planes smashing into each of the towers. But he's actually selling these things. I think he's a rapper, Wicked Thoughts Inc. He's got 7,000 likes on it. So I'm going through comments. Absent says, why would you make this into a hat? I'm all for shock value, but this is in bad taste and it's disrespectful. I don't know if it's more dangerous to wear this in LA or New York. Bo Ryan says, everyone's mad at the hat and not at the U.S. war crimes that caused this to happen, but they're not ready for that conversation. Next comment says, you could at least put some memorable words or dates on that tragedy. Unbeknown says, I don't know, this ain't it, dog. And Shmuley says, we are cooked as a society. I agree with that last comment. I mean, it's in poor taste, obviously. And it's coming from a person who obviously believes it happened. See, nobody should be making jokes about 9/11. Nobody should be making jokes about mass shootings or any of these tragic events if they believe these things are real. Nobody should be making jokes about George Floyd. It's like this staple right-wing griftosphere types like Alex Stein. They all make the same joke about George Floyd. Like, you know, he's been sober 4 years or something along these lines. They're making the joke under the presupposition that the guy died, likely of an overdose, while in police custody. Like, that's not a funny premise. So if you think it's real, it's pretty callous and cold-blooded to flippantly joke about the loss of life like that, and I would never do that. But knowing it's fake, I can clown on it with a clear conscience. And I have a pass. You have an auto-hoax pass. You have an auto-hoax card, an auto-hoax pass. It means that you can be totally irreverent about anything, even nukes. You can make fun of people who have bunkers to duck and cover, who have fallout shelters. You don't have to take any of this stuff seriously. You can laugh at the agitprop. You can think it's funny, as I do, that Roseanne Boylan was trampled to death on 1/6 while carrying a flag that said, "Don't tread on me." Like, you can laugh at the inside jokes, but believers cannot. It's monstrous to do so. Matt Armitage says, escape from New York, snake with eye patch would be cooler. Now, that Escape from New York has some 9/11 stuff in it, worth looking at. But the mayor, there's something with the mayor. The mayor and like World War III is going on. Let me see if I can pull this up. It's one of these things that Jurassic Liars called in about. And I believe it had to do with the president or the mayor. No, the president, Donald Pleasance as president in Escape from New York. And there were a number of connections here. I think it may have had to do with the actor and possibly his birthday. But there was also something else about it. It's the main imagery of the movie itself. Oh, that's right. The actor Donald Pleasance, who plays Donald Trump, who plays the president in this movie, is the guy from Newsbenders. This is the individual at Newsbenders who says 99% of the population wouldn't understand what we're talking about, and the rest of them work for us. I think that's an interesting statement considering what we're talking about here, and why I say don't bother with Normieville and Woketown, because they won't understand it. But the thing is, he's right, or he was right at the time, in Newsbenders, that 99% of the population or more wouldn't get it, and anybody who had more information would likely have been already integrated into their big picture. High-level military, media, government, etc., that they would all work for this mass mind control apparatus, this monolithic mind control apparatus. But now there's another group that doesn't work for them, and we don't work for them, although sometimes I worry that we're offering too many helpful tips. We're helping to improve their game. But that Newsbenders is a must-watch, and the actors associated with it are really interesting for their own reasons as well. Like, for example, the person I showed you is the guy in Newsbenders who's the kind of the higher up who's initiating the newbie. And the new person who's being brought in, this new journalist who's being told that everything is fake, he's actually an actor that was almost recruited to be the voice of HAL 9000 from 2001: A Space Odyssey. So that's a deep connection, because 2001: A Space Odyssey, and here's the individual I'm talking about, and he's looking at the fake moon landing scene here. 2001: A Space Odyssey contains copious predictive programming for 9/11, and even though they show you here how they're staging a moon landing, in the background in one of the scenes you do see the shadow of a speaker that creates the appearance of the Twin Towers. But yeah, this actor was going to be the voice of HAL 9000, but they didn't use him because of his accent. Newsbenders is a play, but it is essentially the best explanation of how it really is, of how this thing does operate. And how do we know this? Well, because predictive and concurrent programming exist. That's how. Unless you're a coincidence theorist and you believe in endless chains of eerie coincidences, and no one has come up with an adequate explanation to just wave that away. What they've done for the last, since like post 9/11 really, for like the last 20 years, the go-to explanation for all these coincidences was it's synchromysticism, it's a higher power, it's collective consciousness, tapping into the matrix, and all kinds of new agey stuff. And what this stuff does is it hides the newsbenders. So one of the things we've done here at IPR as what I think part of our, I guess, our methodology, we're developing a methodology here, but part of our approach has been this general refinement of how we examine things and how we account for what we know. And we know enough now to pin predictive programming on the same people that run the PSYOPs. It's the same production company, the same PSYOP entertainment complex. So forget about the military industrial complex. The PSYOP entertainment complex is higher than that. The theater of PSYWAR. Observing Reality says, it's even deeper than that, Tim. You see the towers as soon as the recruit walks into the interview. And this 30-minute theater is also 1968. And 1968 is the year of 2001: A Space Odyssey. And it's the year that 911 became the emergency number in the United States. 33 years later, we all know what happened. And it takes place in 1973, 5 years in the future. A short meeting, says here, between the newsman and a talented young freelancer. And it has some unexpected twists and turns. So he's approached by a representative of a clandestine agency offering an unusual job creating the news before it happens. Here's another blurb about it. Newsbenders, 1968, directed by Rudolph Cartier. Donald Pleasance plays the shadowy government operator who provides the media with phony news stories to manipulate the population. Every government has a secret. Okay, now I remember what JL was saying about this individual. So he's in Newsbenders, and he's the representative of the shadowy government that bends the news. Then he's the president in Snake Eye with the one-eye symbolism, Escape from New York, World War III, and his name's Donald, all that we talked about. He's also in James Bond. He's the bad guy. What's his? Is he Dr. Evil's based on him? So his character in this capacity he even has the eye wound, the scar on his right eye. Ernest Blowfield, that's who he is, created by Ian Fleming. So Ernest Blowfield from 007. Look at his eye. So you have the Dr. Evil connection, which has, there's a lot we could add into that. But Donald, President, World War III, injury over the eye, Newsbenders with its 9/11 connections, and of course the Dr. Evil has some deeper connections to the Space Needle and Elvis, weirdly. But again, interesting rabbit trail. If you haven't seen Newsbenders, it's pretty much a must watch. They bend the horizon, they bend the news. Oh, nice. Observing Reality says he's a brain bender for Michael Myers. Okay, so that's interesting. Michael Myers wears the face of Captain Kirk, William Shatner, which has some significance. The whole Rocket Man thing we talked about a couple of years ago. Okay, here's an image of him. You know what's really fascinating to do is to follow the various metascriptors, as in the directors, like James Cameron, see where his work has influenced reality. Where has James Cameron taken part in writing history? What psyops can you attribute to him? And I'm looking at LA riots, I'm looking at the Cop City protests, I'm looking at a number of events, say 9/11, for example. But then you can find actors and do the same thing. This is how we know these are not coincidences. You can find an actor like Robert De Niro and operating on the premise that the entertainment precedes the news in this manner to entrain our minds. We looked at Robert De Niro outside of the Trump courthouse, and from that we were able to ascertain that he's going to be involved in some kind of predictive programming connected to Trump. And sure enough, we found multiple instances where Robert De Niro was portraying future Trump as he would be seen on the world stage. Case in point, and I have this listed on my 11 favorite Donald Trump headshot predictive programming examples, but the movie Machete. So Machete has a racist, xenophobic senator giving a speech about the immigrants, and he refers to them as invaders, as I think parasites. He uses these very specific words, and then he's shot at by someone who doesn't like his anti-immigrant stance. Well, what was Trump talking about when he was shot at? He was pointing to the chart that said that there were 20 million undocumented immigrants and they were destroying the cities. So that's an example of Robert De Niro associating himself with Trump on trial, and he just happened to have portrayed the Trump event before it happened. And I have many examples that are even more specific. And I haven't seen this one yet, but I want to. Captain America Brave New World trailer came out that day. Harrison Ford as a president surviving an assassination attempt in a theater. Multiple levels of connection here. The Boys Season 4, Episode 8, Assassination Run. The character Homelander and his bloody face looking like Trump. And he's based on Trump. He's often compared to Trump. And it's so close that they changed the name of the episode. And there are patterns here that are undeniable. I can point to other, like for example, Stranger Things. Season finale, Season 4, has a Trump getting shot. Same connection. The connection there is it's the actor Matthew Modine, who played Joker in Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket. The character Joker represents JFK. And he has the target on his helmet. And based on that, I predicted that the number 47 on the side of Trump's hat would be where the sniper would be shooting. That would be the Kubrick's signature. And that also came true. Here's what I referenced earlier. Douglas Mills, veteran photographer for the New York Times, took both these photographs. Bullet whizzing by Trump and 9/11 being whispered into the ear of George W. Bush in the classroom. We need a mind map of these various photographers at these various psyops as well. This is unbelievable. Well, for me, apparently the public finds it completely believable and normal that the exact wound of Trump was depicted in the Atlantic, down to the very part of the ear where he was nicked. And, this is the Atlantic, which months before had released an image of a gun, a bullet hole, $47, assassination kind of being intimated there. And the conspiracy theory rumor mill was saying, oh, it's because it's Alex Soros. George Soros' son owns the Atlantic and he's going to put a hit out on Trump. So they already have their conspiracy theory for the future event being planted. But this predictive programming is too specific. And then on that day, a movie comes out called Thine Ears Shall Bleed. And I'm just showing examples of how much of an echo chamber they're able to create. One other point here, and this is how subtle the symbolism is. The bullet whizzing past Trump's ear. The Secret Service agent whispering into Bush's ear. So both of these events, both of these photographs involve these photographers who photographed assassination attempts and the assassination and a 9/11 connection. But both of these photographers are suspect in this view. But what is the symbolism of the ear? Not quite sure, but to go back to the list here, Harrison Ford, and then there's several levels to this. So here he is in a theater, and his name is Ford, like Ford Theater where Lincoln was shot. But Harrison Ford's birthday is 7/13. That's the day that Trump was shot. Interestingly, 7/13 is Julius Caesar's birthday, and there was a performance, Shakespeare in the Park, of Julius Caesar, Central Park, where they killed Trump in 2016. So Trump has been killed as Julius Caesar, and I think it has the tagline, "Lend me your ears." So there's some kind of significance to this. I think it has to do with secrets, a reference to the secret societies themselves, the symbolism of the whisper. There's some kind of meaning to it that ties into the ear. But what's obvious here is that all of this is concerted messaging. And we have other examples that are more recent. If you follow my blog, I talked about the concerted messaging that had to go into the rage virus thing, the monkey god in the metascript. So I'm going to point this out really quick just because the predictive programming for 9/11 is not anomalous. Everything that you see is predictive programming in a sense, but some of it's just so specific that at this point we can move past all other explanations than the ones that we proffer here. This is no longer the realm of mysticism, coincidence theorists, synchromysticism, supercomputers. No, we're looking at a form of propagandizing the multitudes that involves synchronizing their minds for future news events with the fiction. So 8/14/2024, monkeypox declared an emergency. 8/14, bad monkey released. On 3/11, very significant date if you think about the concept of the virus, Monkey Man comes out, produced by Jordan Peele. His Nope had a killer chimp. A 90-foot statue of the monkey god Hanuman was erected in Houston, and Black Myth Wukong was released, where you play the monkey god, and it had a record-breaking 1 million concurrent players. All this against the backdrop of Planet of the Apes being released, the Paris Olympics, Planet of the Apes reference, and then, of course, Civil War came out, directed by the person who authored 28 Days Later about the rage virus that came from apes. So I think what we're seeing here is concerted messaging. But what does it mean? In this case, every instance of this predictive programming that connects to this monkey god and the apes, like Chimp Crazy on HBO just came out, it's all tying into this theme. And I have connected this pretty strongly to the mind virus coming from the right wing, Disease X. That's where it's leading. Okay, let's see here. Quay says, so many connections between these characters and events, it's dizzying. Yeah, it is, and I do mind maps in order to make it more understandable, because it sounds crazier than it really is. It's actually very organized. And what you're looking at are these two parallel streams. One is the waking world, one is the dream world, the solar and the lunar. It's all encoded into 2001: A Space Odyssey and the symbol of the eclipse in a very Jungian sense. Sun, conscious, moon, subconscious. And they're influencing us subconsciously, post-hypnotic suggestions, and they're using films, but they're filming situations that they're going to present to you in the news later. And these situations, these hypotheticals, are just being downloaded into your memories, into your memory banks, into your subconscious. And the whole purpose of it is conditioning, rehearsal, like mentally drilling it, advertising. You're having advertisement for every single future event, and some of it's very general. Like 99% of the science fiction right now that starts off on, like on Netflix, the very opening scene is always after the 20th century ruined Gaia, after the nuke apocalypse, after climate change destroyed everything. And it's always man rebuilding. Everything that shows us the future presupposes that right now we're on a death spiral, that we're about to collapse. That's predictive programming. That's also inducing certain levels of pessimism, which is also, of course, by design. But they want to condition us to accept whatever future governmental system they have in store for us. I mean, think about how 1984 was originally kind of a horror story. Like, oh, we're totally surveillanced. This is terrible. Now, people compete to be the most surveillanced. It's rewarding. The more surveillanced you are by the more people, the more money you get. You win at life by totally throwing away your privacy. That's a feat of mass cultural engineering. And this is why it's useful to point out that Netflix's first CEO and co-founder is a blood relative of Edward Bernays and Sigmund Freud. Like, look at these. There's certain pairings you can look at, certain that tell you everything about the world today. Sigmund Freud, Edward Bernays, Netflix. L. Ron Hubbard, Jack Parsons, Marjorie Cameron. Werner von Braun, Walt Disney. Like, there are certain pairings that kind of give you clues as to how this big picture works. But Observing says, Carpenter was a genius portraying a terrifying figure that couldn't be stopped. Yeah, I've looked into the Halloween series, and I do think there's some significance that goes deeper than just a slasher film, some occult stuff. And it may tie in, I believe, to the real meaning to the knife in the context of ritual magic. We did a study on this a couple of years ago because William Shatner was going to space, and we were talking about the significance of how William Shatner, Rocket Man, is also the knife man. All right, let's continue here. I'm just kind of going through the monkey god and the metascript because this is suggesting here the agenda behind monkeypox is really to get us prepared for the mind virus. And training you with the physical virus was getting you ready for the mind virus and getting people ready to quarantine. And having called all this out, what has happened since? Since this monkey god in the metascript posting, Brazil, for example, has blocked X. This is the quarantine I've been talking about. And I specified this last year when Twitter became X. I said that this is the advent of the mind virus age where everyone's just going to accept it. And so my point to bring up 1984 is this. They convinced the masses to be a total surveillance society. They're going to convince the masses to be a total censorship society. They're going to get people to agree to censorship for the same reason they agreed to wear masks and to lock down. They're going to say it's public health. And just like healthy super spreaders have to stay home because they can kill people with weak immune systems, healthy mind virus super spreaders, such as us, will have to be censored because we can spread ideas that people with mind aids, people with weak mental immune systems, will pick up and act upon, just as all these scientific studies are suggesting. Joined by Uncool Ben, says, good morning, thanks for joining. A little later than usual. In fact, if you get the newsletter, I think tonight's rendered image was an owl atop a boombox. Not the usual penguin, but the owl, because it's kind of a late night. So if you go to ips.monster, you'll get the live stream notifications sent directly to your inbox, and the archives with transcripts and links where you can watch it on other platforms. And also ips.monster has links to all the various podcast platforms where we are. Now the X has a deeper esoteric significance to Musk's role on the world stage, because Musk is a composite character like so many of these world stagers. He's part Gene Wilder, part Werner von Braun, part Tony Stark, part Pope Constantine. There are these aspects that go into this character, and even though he throws out memes and he trolls the left and he seems deeply unserious, the fact of it is he's the head of a space agency, and the space program is like top tier mass mind control. Like some people say, what's the point of 9/11? What's the point of this psyop? It's to synchronize the masses into a singular worldview. The space program does that with every mission, with every time that NASA has a big story. Space junk, for example. Space junk just hit someplace in South Carolina. Space junk hit a home in Florida, and the family's suing NASA for mental anguish. You see, this is synchronizing people, that we're all on the same sheet. It's one of the main purposes. And so Musk isn't really there to take you to Mars. He's part of the mind control. And that's why he has social media. Why else? Why else would the guy who's going to take us to Mars waste his time on microblogging and social media? Because this is ultimately what space is. Space is a metaphor for the area between your ears, the space between your ears, your mind, your worldview. And he is curating a very specific worldview, but introducing so many things that the public is going to be against, that at some point there's going to be an outcry. Well, there already is. You see it, Brazil. The EU threatening to arrest him. Like, all this stuff that we're seeing, I've already said would happen as of last year. And when he put the X on the building, it was glowing, very bright, and they made him turn it off. And this is during the dog days of summer, and he said, "Blaze your glory." And we talked about the significance of it, because Constantine saw a glowing cross. He had a vision of a cross, and he said, "Under this sign will conquer the empire," something along those lines. Well, the X symbolizes this, because what are they doing? They're curating a worldview through censorship, and it's going to be enabled by the masses who say it's too dangerous to have disease X floating around. That's one of the bigger pictures here. Worldview maintenance. So the idea that he's just an unserious meme lord, no, that's not the case. Pope Elon. I think we played that song at the intro because I wanted to keep that in mind. The significance of his role. The richest men in the world connected to the fakest, the biggest psyop of all. What gives? So from tonight's MTV Music Video Awards, singer Sabrina Carpenter kissed an alien. And you'll notice Vision for the Blind is a truther. So after Alien, he puts Demon. The Psywar is bifurcated, and the right wing and conspiracy theorists are being taught that aliens are demons. They're also being taught that illegal aliens eat cats. Not a coincidence. The xenophobia psyop is what's being pointed out here. I'm just pointing out that it's like there's fear of the outsiders, and it extends to extraterrestrials. And why? I don't think it's about real space aliens, obviously, nor do I think they're going to introduce any. I think aliens and angels are constructs. Aliens are constructs that atheists believe in, whereas angels, they don't. And in this new paradigm, they're bringing in these science-y versions of these older traditional concepts. Traditional religion is being updated. So the idea here that truthers would see aliens as demons is just very consistent, whereas they're saviors to the left. But as I kind of figured, there's going to be a lot of people posting all kinds of clips and images to show you how the music video awards is awash with occult symbolism. And I think that the target market for all this stuff happens to be fringe right wing. I think they're definitely trying to create this or maintain this schism. And the idea of aliens being demons is here to stay. Tucker Carlson often endorses that theory that aliens are demons that have made a deal with what? Not corporate America, because he's on the right. Government. The bifurcation of it also gives away the fakery. The fact that the predictive programming connects to psyops that all have very specific political messaging with very precise ideological orientation, none of it's random, it tells you that this is structural. You know, we're looking at the structure of media. What we do here, the IPR Press Club, for example, we're not trying to create a newspaper to tell people what's going on in the world. The purpose of our press club is we are examining the mediation itself, the mediators, and the structure of media. Uncool Ben has arrived with a box full of blue wrenches, 20 of them. Queen Diamond B, Busy 56, Lazarus NDB, CMGZ 510, Art Bell, Buzzy, Cleodessa, Chris Diamond, Citizen Z, Meowry, Vanden, Jane Smith, Michael Jones, Lennis Eshmon, Conspiracy Thug, Max Carter, Old School Days, Elsa J have all received the coveted blue wrench. Abuse the power responsibly. Observing Reality says Trutherville is the ultimate target. You think we are the only people who know Trutherville, the only minds who can be reached. They're looking for the same people we are. Yeah, you're right about that. You're right about that. Why do you think the media spends so much time hating on conspiracy theorists? Because they want to catch the people who would otherwise escape the box. And then they want to make examples out of them, and they want to use AI to re-educate them to get them back into the box. Roxy W says, nothing phobic about it. 2 7-foot Somalis delivered my fridge. I didn't have them install the ice maker, just wanted them out. 2 Hispanics brought my dishwasher. Okay, here's why I even bring this up. This is a non-issue, and it becomes an issue whenever we're getting close to the election. So last year it was cannibals, this year is cat eaters. No evidence for either. The evidence that is spread around is some out-of-context clip. Like, did you see the clip of what looked to be a human being on a spit being cooked? Yeah, that was a Halloween prop from South Africa from like 5 years ago. And last year they said, oh, this is in Haiti. So this is an example of low information belief. Trutherville, low information believers, right wing, mainstream, low information believers ran with the story. Do you remember what Trump said when he said that they're eating dogs and cats? He said, I saw it on TV. President Donald Trump said, I saw it on TV. These 5 words sum up the foundational error that most people make. They have used the TV, the screen, as something of a, almost like another sensory apparatus. I saw it on TV, therefore. But yeah, Donald Trump said, I saw it on TV. So here's the guy walking down the street with a goose. And I saw this image shared by Laura Loomer, who eats dog food. And she said, this guy's walking down the street like he just got back from Chick-fil-A. This is not in Springfield, Ohio. And I don't have the exact date, but this is not a recent photo, nor is the individual from Haiti. Yet this picture started it all. So this tells you something. The people who reacted as though the picture was real were auto believers. And I want to make this point because many truthers are auto-believers. They automatically believe their side's spin. The automatic needs to go. You should automatically reject extraordinary claims unless there's more evidence. And by extraordinary, it could even include like the conspicuous political utility of it. Like they just happened to bring in cat-killing immigrants just as the election comes out, when it could be used to help bolster the closed border side. So that to me makes the claim already questionable. And nobody's going to care about the cats after the election. Okay, moving on. Now, didn't a couple of Somali immigrants try to lynch poor Jussie Smollett? Where were they from? You know, remember Jussie Smollett? He was accosted on his way to I guess it was a subway at 3 a.m. And he alleged that a couple of Magas lynched him and dumped bleach on him and used really offensive words. Then it turned out that no, actually it was his two friends, and it was a psyop. But for 24 hours, it was treated as real because people are auto-believers. This is a very important distinction. This is fundamental to auto-hoaxing. The auto-hoaxer, the term, it's just a new way of describing a skeptic. And it was a term invented by conspiracy theorists who didn't like those of us who were quick to call things fake. So it was a pejorative. But the problem is they want to insist on auto-belief. So if you automatically believe, you end up a fool, a puppet, a propaganda mule, an overly stressed out, overly concerned truther or wokester with no bandwidth available for anything else, appreciating the real world. Think about that. The more immersed you get in the psyops, the less you are immersed in the real world. And this is their goal. They want you to be metaverse dominant, not meatverse. They want you locked down, whether they tell you to lock down because there's a threat like Fallout or monkeypox, or locked down because you're so busy researching the deep state that you never leave your house anymore. Or if you do, you never cease looking through the screen, doom scrolling, retweeting, fighting the info war, digital soldiers. And just because you see it on the screen doesn't make it real. There's a term for that. I call it CSAY. CSAY is in the auto-hoax lexicon. And shortly after I coined this phrase, the DHS came up with something called CSAY Day, Homeland Security. We're talking, here we go. If you see something, say something. Homeland Security, the department that runs these big psyops, stole my phrase. I said, don't follow CSAY. Reject it like you reject hearsay. You can no longer trust video evidence. Disbelieve by default. And so the DHS literally stole my word and created a holiday for it. Only their holiday, their whole day is basically, if you see something suspicious, say something. In other words, be paranoid. So here I am saying, don't be paranoid. Don't believe anything without evidence. And they're saying, be paranoid and call the DHS. Like this is
Hi, I'm Susanna Marking with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security's If You See Something, Say Something campaign. Our nation remains in a heightened threat environment, as recent attacks in communities across our country have so tragically demonstrated. But the public can play an important role by being aware of your surroundings and by reporting suspicious activity to local authorities. September 25th is National If You See Something, Say Something Awareness Day.
Okay, so September 25th. We should make that auto hoax day, but see what they did there. We could probably we could take it back. We should take back CSAY. We should flood CSAY, that hashtag, on the 25th with relevant and truthful information. Marcel says, thank God I have my garden to release energy in. There have been multiple studies about the deleterious effects on people's mental health when they pay too much attention to bad news. And then imagine overreacting to bad news so often that you're trauma bonded with media in some way. You're triggerable. You cry for crisis actors. You donate to Go Fraud Me. You're pining over the epidemic of mass shootings. The children are martyrs. The world's going to blow up if we don't vote for the right guy. I mean, you take all this stuff into account, that does take up bandwidth. It does steal a lot of your time, attention, energy. Loosh is a term I hear thrown around, which I think works. The attention economy. It's there to take your focus, but what positive gain is there in becoming paranoid? When it's also true that paranoid beliefs can actually have bad effects, psychosomatic effects. That's why I'm worried about people like Richie from Boston who are fixated on the chemtrail theory. Like, they could, in fact, suffer some kind of psychosomatic effect where they die of chemtrail lung. It could literally happen. And what about the people who can't sleep at night because they're afraid of space junk? Like space junkophobia, there's going to be something, some kind of new phobia, which is what this whole thing is built upon. Panics. Moral panic, panicdemic. It's all about the panic. You know, ironically, in the Tesla Roadster sent to space that was surrounded by space bubbles, on the dashboard, it said, "Don't panic." And that's because Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, this, and something else to consider, the book Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is about the supercomputer that knows the answer to everything. And they ask, what's the meaning of life? What's the meaning of everything? The solution to everything? The ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. And this supercomputer said 42. 42. Now, this is the ASCII code for the asterisks. So some say that this is the wild card, anything you want. So there is an explanation for the meaning of 42, but there's an occult meaning to this number, and it's not limited to Elon Musk's little eccentric uses of numerology, numberology. The numbers that went into the purchase of Twitter is kind of crazy too. All the 44s, 44 billion. But the 42 thing is a facet of a lot of the space program's occult symbolism. And the space popes are all about that number. Even if they're not talking about it together, it's a cult. Jeff Bezos has a $42 million clock inside of the Devil Mountain. Why is Bezos hiding a $42 million clock in a mountain? Well, there's a lot of reasons for it, and there are a lot of interesting people around this story, like Stuart Brand from the Whole Earth Project. There's a whole rabbit trail we could get into just by looking at the number 42 and its meaning to the space papacy. One of the clues here is it ties into Saturn, time, the god of death and the harvest. And so the 42 tied to the clock, you got Kronos. You know, Kronos eating his own children, Saturn eating his own child. What does that mean? It all goes back to the time consuming everything, and the months are the children being consumed. It's all just symbolic. And I've made this connection that Abraham with the knife about to stab his kid is another version of Saturn. I think the Abrahamic faiths, they all go back to the same body of symbolism. The six-pointed star, the black cube, it's all Saturnian. But if you look at images of Saturn, he's usually got a scythe, you know, like the Grim Reaper, the Father Time. He's got the scythe, but he's often taking a bite out of a child or eating a child, devouring his child. It's always quite horrific, but look at the comparison here. I'll take one of these images, there are so many, of Saturn about to kill his child. It's grotesque, and like, what the hell does this actually mean? But I think this is the same image as Abraham and Isaac. And I don't think it's meant to be taken literally. It's all part of the astrotheological story and the harvest and the death of the consumption of life by Father Time. There's some deeper meaning to it. Okay, continuing. Angst G said, if you listened to Alex Jones and took him seriously, you'd never leave the house. Why would you? If you took the news seriously, the mainstream news, you would never leave the house. If you believe in the climate models, the pandemic model, if you believe in what the scientists want you to believe in, you would sleep with a space junk helmet, you'd never leave without a mask, and you'd probably get rid of your cars because the carbon footprint. You shouldn't even own an iPhone if you really believe the worst case scenarios. But people don't live as though they really believe these things. When was the last time you saw a conspiracy theorist wearing a mask because of chemtrails? Never. Alex Jones. You know, Alex Jones is probably kicking himself that he didn't think of that. He sold iodine after Fukushima because of fallout. He sells water filters because fluoride in the water. He never came up with the idea of selling some kind of protective garment or some kind of PPE for geoengineering. Like, we could corner that market, but I'm not in the business of Psy-war profiteering. And Alex Jones is a war profiteer. You know, he after 9/11, he promulgated all kinds of theories. Inside job, Dick Cheney, all these military contracts, people making money off this, insurance money, etc. That's quite literally what the big agent provocateurs in Trutherville do. They sell Laura Loomer. Laura Loomer is selling radiation protection kits and dog food that you can eat in case of an apocalypse. Matt Armitage says, Jordan Maxwell's theory on Saturn is interesting. Yeah, Jordan Maxwell never got all the credit he deserved, and his work was unfortunately targeted by intellectual property thieves, but his ideas made their way into a Dan Brown movie. But what he was showing were clear examples of syncretism. And that's one of the keys to understanding the modern paradigm, is recognizing syncretism in plain sight, that the NASA rocket is a stylized obelisk. It's quite literally an obelisk. Its purpose is the same purpose as the stone obelisk in St. Peter's Basilica, same purpose. And the top of the obelisk, the golden tip of the obelisk, represents the pharaohic elite. The capsule on the rocket is the capstone. The UFO on the top of the Space Needle. These are all symbolic bits of architecture, but it represents the power elite. It represents the elite and then the masses below them. But the capstone, the capsule, in fact, it's very clear with Blue Origin, where you see the images of the capsule, and his rockets are ridiculous, by the way. They look exactly like Dr. Evil's rockets. So we talked about Donald Pleasance, who plays the Dr. Evil character in James Bond, the newsbender. He's got the scar on his eye, like Dr. Evil. Well, Jeff Bezos actually fits the same archetype. So let me just point out this. You look at Bezos' rocket, Dr. Evil, because he was being made fun of endlessly. And he adopted a Dr. Evil laugh at one point. So here you can see the Dr. Evil, Jeff Bezos, Donald Pleasance from archetype, and then the rocket on the right is, I'll have to shrink it down so you can see it. So you're looking at two different rockets. The one on the right is Jeff Bezos's, and the one on the left is Dr. Evil's. Now, these are intentional because the obelisk is, in fact, a reference to the sun god. It's a male symbol. But my point is, it's a symbol first. It's not even really truly a utilitarian art piece because it can't really take you to Mars. But then let's take one closer look at Jeff Bezos and all of his PR photos going back years. And this only changed recently mostly I think just age. But in all of his old photos that would show up on magazines, he'd get some coverage. There was always this strange emphasis on one of his eyes. Like he always had one eye bugged out and the other one not. And so that connects to the Dr. Evil eye thing. It's like a sly wink. And it was a consistent thing with him for years. And there were a lot of people asking about it. Now, what is the meaning of it? It goes deep. So the richest man in the world, of course, is a tie-in here. There's the connection between Bezos and Nimrod, the builder of the Tower of Babel. And on the back of the dollar bill, you have the pyramid with the 1776 on the bottom. 1776 is a reference to the founding of America, but also the building of the Tower of Babel, its founding year, on the Masonic calendar AL. So in their lore, 1776 ties in to the Tower of Babel. Now, on the back of the dollar bill, it's the pyramid, but it still represents the Tower of Babel, the 1776, which is why the One World Trade Tower is 1776 feet high. But in the year 1776 AD, when America was founded, it was 5776 on the old calendar. 5776 is the height in inches of the Great Pyramid in Giza. So connecting this, we have a connection between the Tower of Babel, the pyramid on the dollar bill. It says here, height of pyramid, 5,776 inches. The One World Trade Tower. And then, of course, Bezos has already been connected to the Tower of Babel because of his Helix headquarters for Amazon. The new headquarters has been mocked for looking exactly like the classical representation of the Tower of Babel. So connecting all of this, the guy with the eye, symbolically, referencing, I think, something deeper, but Dr. Evil, the Bezos single eye thing, what does it all mean? Well, I think it ties in to the money and the man with the most money, and the pyramid on the money has the mono eye. Like there's the one eye. So whose eye is that? And I think we're getting to the point here by looking at all the symbolism where we can see how various world stage personas are carriers of a body of symbolism that tell a bigger story. So here's the picture we're talking about here, the one eye. So the richest man in the world, wonky eye, all kinds of Tower of Babel connections, Dr. Evil. What does it all mean? Catching up on your comments. Jordan Maxwell's theory on Saturn is interesting. Hey, one other point. 2001 Space Odyssey, in the book, it's the monoliths. I think they're going to Saturn. Their journey's to Saturn, not Jupiter. But they couldn't make a believable Saturn for the movie. Yeah. The Bezos, the mono eye money, most money in the world, the one eye on the dollar bill, the Tower of Babel. What is all this? And now, one more point here. So the eye in the pyramid, that's the capstone. Now we go to the rocket or the obelisk, and you have the capsule. So the reason I'm pointing out the capsule with Bezos is that that is the capstone. And he rode in this thing when he flew on the anniversary of Apollo 11, and he launched at 9:11 a.m. Apollo 11, 9:11. Oh, look, someone else has made this connection. Not just Dr. Evil, but they've connected Bezos. Amazon founder Jeff Bezos completed a spaceflight Tuesday on Blue Origin New Shepard. The flight was broadcast live. In the 1997 parody Mission Impossible 2, the sworn enemy of the protagonist, Dr. Evil, fled Earth in an indescribable spaceship. And they've connected Dr. Evil to Bezos. But here, weirdly, in this article, they didn't put Dr. Evil. They put the actor we were just talking about. Like they kind of made an error here somehow. Marcel says spells for sure on the money. Oh, yeah. Folded up $20 bill, 9/11. Folded up $100 bill. You got a space needle with an EMP blast on it. And there's some other connections I found with the $100 bill. Like, here's some examples. Actually, I have this one on video. This is a video. I'll put a link below. He goes through all the different instances of folded dollar bills that show you things that are going to happen in the future. So we have predictive programming even on the money, or I think the money would be one of the places where it would be most conspicuous. But people have done numerous breakdowns of it. The 9/11 stuff is very well known. The $20 bill is associated with the Twin Towers. But the $100 bill having a space needle on it is highly significant for a few reasons. And in Sonic the Hedgehog, one of these movies, in the intro, he runs through Seattle throwing bombs into the gutter and it floods, and he gets paid in $100 bills. So you see Seattle, Space Needle, flood, blowing up Seattle, the 100. And around the time I started looking into this, there was this thing called the Century Project, where they put millions of dollars of work into the Space Needle and surrounding areas. And I thought, it's a lot of money, probably going into a future PSYOP. But I've seen this consistent reference to the $100 bill and EMPs. For example, in Free Guy with Ryan Reynolds. If you haven't seen Free Guy, it's kind of like They Live, but from the perspectives of NPCs becoming sentient. So Free Guy, very, very interesting movie all around. It definitely has a decent subtext, even though it's just kind of a comedy. But there's this scene where they have to hit the reset button on the city because the people are waking up. And the character who pushes the reset button has a $100 bill on his t-shirt. And the $100 bill has been, again, consistently associated with, because of the number 100, I've found numerous instances. Just like with the 20, the 50, I believe, has some Hoover Dam stuff. But predictive programming on the money, it's like sigil magic. Because there's no way you would ever see that. It's just sort of encoded into it. And that's how sigils work. And according to the theory and practice of sigil magic, if you're not familiar with it, it's a form of spell casting that was developed by this artist, Austin Osman Spare, and I think fine-tuned and expanded on by other magical schools of thought, came back big with chaos magic. But the idea is that you could take a sentence, a statement of intent, and that by jumbling up the letters or by reconfiguring it in such a way that it's unrecognizable, it still contains the meaning originally imbued into it. And that by focusing on such a symbol and absorbing it into your subconscious, the full import, the full meaning is essentially downloaded and acted upon at a subconscious level. So it's a form of like self-programming, but the theory behind it too is that it's in a way it somehow creates synchronistic events. Magic, sigil magic is what they call it. But one of the things I've come across is that in the theory of group magical ritual, the participants don't need to be fully aware of what it all means. They just need to feed it their attention, and the magic will work. I'm like, well, that's interesting. You know, what are we a part of? And can you disentangle from it, or are you just plugged into something by default where your soul, your whatever, your psyche, you're somehow being taxed, a louche tax? Are we all feeding the matrix on some level? It's an interesting idea, but that's why it's interesting to go down these trails, because whether or not you believe in magic and astrology, as J.P. Morgan said, millionaires don't, but billionaires do, and they believe in more than just astrology. And it's certainly true, even without going into the esoteric side of it, everything on the world stage is evidence of time and space control with a high level of significance placed on what would be considered the witches' Sabbats, the major pagan holidays. Oh, by the way, Leave the World Behind, this was posted by Dog Days. The very last scene had this emergency alert system message on a computer. And if you zoom in on it, it says 917 T024 or 91724. In other words, 4 days from now. Leave the World Behind, which predicted the planes, Boeing, and many other situations in the last year, has as its last scene a reference to next week. Here's another message regarding some raw alerts. Military officials are investigating after a rear tail cone from a Boeing C-17 landed in a school parking lot. No injuries were reported. Well, have they looked underneath it? So this is just recent news again. But Leave the World Behind had planes falling, had Donnie Darko references galore. The character Rose is called Donnie Darko by some other characters. And the movie Donnie Darko is about planes falling. Well, that's a big part of it. Matt says Russia ain't playing next week. Well, 9/17, mark your calendar, Leave the World Behind. In that movie, it's the Tower of Babel falling. And it has all kinds of subtext. Like Kevin Bacon's character, he's like the right-wing domestic violent, well, rather right-winger, but he intimates foreknowledge. He's loading up his car with water. He knows something's going on. He's very protective over his house. He's obviously a prepper or something. But Leave the World Behind, perfect analogy for Behold the End War Live. And it's not just the falling planes, but there were many other things from that movie that followed. Even the Trump head wound thing was predicted in that movie in some way. It was released on JFK's death date, which is significant. But there were some hints throughout the movie. It takes place in zip code 1963, 11963. So we all know 119 is frequently referenced in various psyops. 1963, the year JFK was shot. So there's something to it there. And as with many of these movies, a lot of what it predicts doesn't take place until years later. And it's only been a year. And so far, some of the general themes have come out, and it does seem like that movie has great predictive value. And why wouldn't it? It's an Obama production. The strange stuff involves Matt Perry and the Matt Perry death and the eclipses. I mean, it's typical, I should say. It's not like it's out of the ordinary, but it was one of the more ham-fisted examples. Like if I was going to teach a class to noobs on predictive programming, like a study on predictive programming, I would take Leave the World Behind, because there are so many examples where you can show scene by scene every single detail has a double meaning. Like this is Kubrick level as far as the depth encoded into that movie. And a lot of it you wouldn't know unless you were watching it and pausing it frequently. Like Julia Roberts' character, she stands in front of a painting that makes it look like she's wearing a Klan hood. Like it's not even that subtle. And the author of the book said that his book was called Prescient and Predictive for 2020. So his book dealt with lockdowns. His book dealt with these themes. People locked down, they don't have any answers, they don't know what's going on, suspicious of their neighbors. So his book was considered to be prescient, and he kind of grinned when he said this. And then the movie based on the book is also eerily prescient. And I'm not one on making predictions based on any kind of arcana or gematria calculators or prophecies, but I do make predictions based on Netflix. And it would seem to me that Netflix is telling us that 9/17 could be the big one. So just a heads up, get your space junk helmets on. History is made today, first ever commercial spacewalk. One of the reasons why I even noted this particular event is they beat Tom Cruise to it. He was going to be the first civilian to do a spacewalk. But we also want to point out here that their special effects aren't getting any better. And this is one of the worst examples I've ever seen. This is supposed to be some guy climbing out of the capsule and looking at the Earth. And again, I want to point out, you don't see what he sees. You see him having a vision. You have to trust that what he sees is actually a ball floating in space. But from my perspective, it looks like some guy is silhouetted by a big screen. And Occam's razor, what's more likely? That they're really sending people to space or that they're faking it? There are people who say it would be harder to fake the moon landing than to just do it. And that's redonkulous. Yeah, Inks G, the Obama thing is interesting because they're now producing movies. And so they produce Leave the World Behind, chock full of predictive programming. You know, in the soundtrack, there was this, there's the soundtrack for Leave the World Behind has a lot of stuff worth looking into as well. But the fact is, Obama was the president, which means he was obviously in the know about all the fakery. And he got in on the business. He got in on the PSYOP entertainment complex. Look at the track title, Cyber Attack, White Lion. But one of the songs has the singer actually blowing up a transformer and starting a blackout. One more thing. I was trying to figure out what this movie was called before I saw it. And I looked up Blackout Obama movie because I knew that he produced it. Well, it turns out there's a movie from 2013 that came out on the anniversary of Hurricane Sandy. It's called Blackout. And interestingly enough, guess who's in the movie? Barack Obama. President Barack Obama has a little cameo in this movie. A terrifying, realistic, counterfactual drama documentary exploring the effects of a devastating cyber attack on the national electricity grid. Blackout combines fake and real footage, CCTV archives. So this blackout, national grid going out, and then Obama being in the movie. And then he puts out a movie 10 years later, Leave the World Behind, about this exact thing. It's called American Blackout. This National Geographic movie chronicles society rapidly falling apart in the wake of a cyber attack. Also, if you recall, the Cyber Polygon event was canceled, and on that day, everything they were drilling for happened in Canada. Major communication failures. National Geographic chronicles society falling apart after a cyber attack that wipes out the U.S. power grids. Oddly, it has an appropriate companion in PBS's War of the Worlds documentary, 75th anniversary. War of the Worlds and American Blackout. Now, I brought up War of the Worlds, which is about an alien invasion, and there were rumors that the reading of it by Orson Welles had somehow triggered a panic. And so think about this. I mentioned the word panic. Panic, pandemic, moral panic. The idea of the information spreading like a mind virus and creating a panic. So mind viruses and panics go hand in hand. But what's interesting about War of the Worlds and the panic associated with it is that it gave you an example of what happens if everybody only listens to one source. And that one source is saying, we're being invaded. It's pretty easy. If they trust the source implicitly, they're going to react in a predictable way. And I think 2020 was War of the Worlds in that sense. You had a monolithic media reading a script, and everybody reacted to it like it was real. Only at no point were we told it was merely an exercise, a script. DJ Black said Stu Peters had Austin to discuss flat Earth on his show. You know, the thing about Stu Peters and Austin is they're in the box. They're not auto hoaxers. They believe all the stuff has happened for real. So like Stu Peters thinks 9/11 really happened. So I don't care his opinion on the shape of the world. And then both Stu Peters and Austin, they're both major Jew-phobes. They're always throwing out stuff that is highly discrediting or at least disruptive if you're trying to have a meaningful conversation about mediation, worldview, sanity. You don't get there with these guys because they're playing in the political football arena. They're playing in the info war. They're throwing barbs at the other side. Stu Peters is a grifter, and I think his job is to smear by association every good idea. What's nice about auto hoaxing versus flat Earth is that flat Earth is something that's very mainstreamable and it's not a threat. And so they're always able to talk about, you have like Candace Owen. I'm surprised Laura Loomer hasn't gone there yet. They can all play in the flat Earth sandbox, not a threat to the system, because they're all in the MSM worldview. They don't know the news is faked. But what we're doing isn't something they can appropriate. You'll never see Stu Peters start saying, nobody died, nobody cried, because it would destroy his entire political position. You wouldn't remain on the right fringe of the political horseshoe if you didn't think that there was real blood. There are still people mad who want revenge against who they think did 9/11. And I'm like, well, what if 9/11 was a propaganda film? Who are you going to get mad at? And it was bipartisan. Not only that, it's global. And it goes in the history books that there's a power elite that writes our history in advance, and there's nothing you can do about it. The good news is it's fiction. So you don't have any reason to be mad about deaths. You could be mad about being lied to, I suppose. But I'm not mad. I have reached a state with regard to the world of peace. I've made peace with the Psy War. I'm a conscientious objector. I'm not participating in it. But we talked about the origin of skepticism and Pyrrho. And I call auto hoaxers pyromaniacs on the world stage. They said that the suspension of judgment would remove you from the unnecessary emotional entanglements with things that you can't verify as real that are probably not real. And the result was inner peace. They called it peace of mind, ataraxia. So there is a goal, there's a purpose to this. You could be a triggered truther, a paranoid delusionist, a triggered wokester, an apathetic, clueless blue pillar, or you can be an auto hoaxer and you can achieve ataraxia, calmness, untroubled by disquiet. The highest goal of the Epicurean disciple was ataraxia, tranquility of mind. And interestingly, it was even said that this was the best state to be in when entering into war. So even if you're going into war, it's best to have a cool head. There's no reason to go into it in a state of frenzy. And so the idea of like truthers running around screaming, chanting, raging, that's a tantrum. That's a toddler's tantrum. Protesting in the street, getting beat up by cops. Yeah, you're mental patients in a mass open asylum and you're fighting with the orderlies. You're in no position to change it because you're in the asylum. I'm not in their asylum. And you can't be off the grid. Even like if you let's say you move out in the hills, you dug a bunker, you're locked away with your storable food, your generators, your MREs, your Bibles. Now you're off the grid, right? No. You're so deep in the grid that you've been rendered so paranoid that you locked yourself down. So you can't be off the grid physically if you're not off the grid mentally. And the only people who can claim to be off the grid are those who are untroubled by the 9/11s and the COVID-19s and the bowl cut shooters and the moral pandemics or panicdemics, the engineered moral panics, everything that they do, like, oh, I'm going to be triggered tonight because Kate Perry levitated in front of a portal that looked like it came from CERN, or she did some acts on the stage, and you'll probably hear about it tomorrow. Like, I'm untroubled by any of this stuff. And I'm not burnt out. I'm not trying to hide. I'm not an escapist. I haven't been rendered apathetic, which is another goal. They would prefer that you didn't pay attention. The propaganda works best when you don't pay attention because you think it's so awful. You just accept it all as true. You just give it your tacit approval. You sign it without reading the fine print. And I'm not signing off on any of this stuff anymore. If I didn't watch it, I'm not assuming it was true. I'm assuming it, depending on how extraordinary of a claim it is, to be likely fakeable if there's an agenda attached. But that's what retro auto hoaxing is for. You can look back at something 20 years ago and still, it's not settled if you haven't investigated it. Keep in mind, every fake event that you debunk will go into the textbooks as a real event. The truth is not a consideration. That's why we have to create this parallel media. The more content creators there are on this side of the screen, the more permanent a record we will have of things as they actually happened. You don't have that record of things as they actually happened from InfoWars or any of that ilk. You have a version. One second. I have a phone call coming in. Okay, so I'm going to have to head out. Apparently I'm late. This is Auto Hoax, or GTFO, Chief Crow and the Flat Earth Worms. I'll send out archives in the morning. I'll be continuing this conversation tomorrow, and we'll have phones open as well. So thanks again for all the comments.